Here's another quick writing prompt called Flowchart Story. This is inspired by Alex McElroy's The Death of Your Son, a Flowchart. And I love that the form is crystal clear from the beginning. We have yes, no, question, answer, and we have a common consequence. Your son is alive, or your son is dead. So I wanted to borrow this form, and I used a very similar format. I had a question answer, I had a yes, no, and I had a recurring consequence. Now this is a lot of fun for me because forms offer you an opportunity to ask, what can I do in this kind of story that is not possible in your kind of standard multi-paragraph story? So you might be asking yourself, is this just a gimmick? Just a way to make the story look flashy? And we don't want to just use a gimmick. We don't want style without any substance. We want both. So let's ensure that we're not being gimmicky, and we'll use Alex McElroy as our teacher. So there's 3 main things you have to do to make sure it's not a gimmick. Number 1 is establish form. Alex does this right away in his story with a very clear title, and then a very standard form. We have boxes, yes, no, your son is alive. Step 2 is to break that form. What Alex does is he breaks from a pretty procedural voice, asking questions like, where were you born, to a really familiar voice. Did you tell your mother you Frenched Bianca Madero? He also breaks us out of that yes-no form and makes it more of a conversation. We get responses like, of course, define too much. In fact, the story continues to break in small ways throughout the rest of the story. The questions get really personal, the tone gets a little aggressive even, and at one point we lose the option of your son is alive, which lets us know the consequence is the son is dead. But the third and most important way to make sure it's not a gimmick is to show the reason for the form. And for me, this happens at the very end of his story, when it's just a back and forth and we know the son is dead. The tone shifts again to this corporate voice. The average length of bereavement leave is 3 days. So when will you get over this? Tomorrow? Make it tomorrow. Now for me, this is what makes the story work. Because this whole time, I haven't really considered who is asking these questions. And now I kind of know it's HR or this person's boss. And it is the most cruel and unnatural thing I can think to say to a person who has just lost their child. And I think the flowchart matches the unnaturalness of that. The flowchart is very sterile. It feels cold and distant. It does not feel like the way you would conduct a conversation with someone who is grieving. And so I feel like the form has earned itself by the end. And that's what makes this not a gimmick. So in my own draft, I'm definitely still in the gimmick phase. I'm playing around with the shape. I haven't really figured out the reason why this shape can do something that a typical story shape can't. And that's okay. I think when you're playing with form, you do have to live in the gimmick phase for a while. But your goal is to get out of it. Your goal is to give style and substance. And the more you read stories like Alex McElroy's and other experimental forms, the more you'll see the possibilities in embracing something strange.